where to start. I had it all planned. But then listening to that, I was thinking, hang on a minute, she's stolen from thunder. You know, it's marvellous to know that we're all on the same wavelength, you know, and we're all talking about the same issues, and it's just a matter of how you present it and how you determine what the priorities are. But thank you for this little gathering. It is important that we maintain dialogue and communication, because I think a lot of us are sort of growing in strength and growing in knowledge as well, and that you know, every time we all move and do something, we learn something different, and in most cases it's always in our favour. And right now I'm beginning to become chirpy and very cheeky in terms of where we're at back home, because when I first started, and if I could just give you a bit of background, that picture there represents a fellow in 1972, and I'll let you know of my age. In fact, I wasn't quite 21 then, right, when we took this action, nor did we really understand the significance of what was happening. And it wasn't until about, it would have been about 15 years later that we understood the true significance of that action, when a social scientist by the name of C.D. Rowling, a very esteemed gentleman in this study, and he wrote in a book called The Destruction of the Aboriginal Society. I think that was the book it was called. He wrote 3 magnificent books on Aborigines and the colonial effects and the devastation that it had on our people. But he talked about the symbolism of us putting up an Aboriginal embassy. It was never ever known as a tent embassy. That came later from the media, because we had tents everywhere in the end. This was the first 2 tents within, I think, about 6 hours after we put that thing up, the embassy up. It was the beach umbrella. That was the embassy only, and it was the Quakers who bought the 2 tents. 2 female Quakers who bought those tents and said it might be a bit more comfortable to sleep in a tent rather than sit under an umbrella all the time. At least you have then a structure that that looks like something where we can meet. But he talked about the embassy being very significant in that it brought about the question of Australia's sovereignty, and it brought into question that very issue of British and Australian sovereignty. And so from that, we began to, well, I at least anyway, began to truly begin to look at this whole question of sovereignty, because I thought, well, hang on a minute. If you look at one of those plaques, there were about 6 plaques that we wrote there, and the 2 significant ones were, well, there were 3 significant ones that we wrote up. One was Land Rights Now, or else. I don't know what we meant by or else, but we were pretty brazen at that time, you know, bulletproof and bomb-proof sort of thing. And then the other main poster that we had was Sovereignty Never Ceded. That was on a poster that was there. And the third one was, of course, Stop Killing Our Children. They were the 3 key factors there, and then there was another one about compensation, and it brings into now the question of these discussions in terms of reparation and compensation. So that was a 4th poster that we had there. So we really got this thing, put it before them very early. And of course, the embassy had some very significant, I suppose, little wins along the way. The main one being, that was January, by October 1972, we had a change of government, and it became the Whitlam Labor government. For those of you who know about Australian history, you'll understand that he was the only 2nd Prime Minister in Australia's history to be sacked by the Queen. And that's a long story, but it goes to something that you guys are studying here now in terms of mining and multinational corporation interests in Australia. So no doubt that period of Gough Whitlam's period as Prime Minister will be revisited with modern scholars, through modern scholars, I think, particularly in relation to the Santos and the oil and the natural gas stuff. There'll be a lot of discussion on this in the future. So not only were we way ahead, about 40 or 50 years in advance of modern day thinking at that time, because we were talking about all these things then, but so too was Whitlam. He was very much on that page. So by 1973, he commenced the process of introducing land rights, and of course, after his sacking, a fellow by the name of Malcolm Fraser, a liberal conservative, I think he was a very small L liberal, that man, but he carried out that dream with Whitlam and the Aboriginal people, and of course he introduced land rights and made it a reality within the Australian political system, and that was very, very important to us. And of course we've gone on since to make some significant wins in this regard. The problem that we have now is this whole question now of sovereignty, because we've had to shift from winning land rights and winning our basic rights over that. But when the High Court in 1992, 20 years after this, the High Court of Australia, in a case called Marbo, decided that, okay, we're going to look at this whole question of Aboriginal continued occupation and existence now, assertion of our rights. The High Court was basically forced to look at the whole question of Aboriginal claims for land rights. And in doing so, listening to all the adversarial arguments that went before and that came before that court, they realised that we have a real problem. And this is quite significant, because if you look at that court case, on the one hand, I'll do it like this. On the one hand, the court found in our favour, but then realising by finding in our favour, whoops, what about our sovereignty as an Australian state? Where do we fit? And they realised this because they used the term in there, what is it, a very fragile, they didn't use the word fragile, but they used the word, the skeletal framework of the Australian legal system that gives them their strength and their justification as a nation state. Because once they did that, you see, they couldn't knock back the fact that our rights to that land has never ever been taken from us. And so within the legal considerations, their problem was this: if we are then, and we can't establish now that we have bona fide legal rights to this land and call this land ours by English law, then how do we deal with this? And the way in which they dealt with this was that they then created another myth in that legal decision. And they created the myth by giving themselves the power through English feudal land system and the ability of the Crown to place its sovereignty over the people. So they gained territorial sovereignty without a legal basis. And so then when they looked at it, they concluded that Aboriginal rights continue to exist by virtue of their law and their customs. Right? So our law still applies to that land. And this is one of the big problems that the Australian governments have right now. And they go through, when they go through the case, there's another little problem that they identify, which is very real for them. And unfortunately, all the white lawyers in Australia have got no idea how to deal with this. Pardon me, and that is, the court said that on other questions of our rights, no court in Australia has the ability to deal with it. In particular, that is the question of our sovereignty, our continuing sovereignty. And the court says that this is a question that belongs to another jurisdiction. Now, when you've got the highest court of Australia making those admissions, they're international legal admissions against interest. And it creates enormous difficulties for these folks. And so my way of thinking, and I've sort of been at this for a while now, after this embassy, I'll take you down this road, after this embassy was put up, we had a bit of an internal battle. And so my colleagues sort of, they didn't assassinate me with a bullet, but they did a bit of character assassination. Right, so anyway, after that I will go into the pettiness of that, but I ended up going home and playing football. Yeah. But you see, I had no peace because Christmas of 1972, I was working in the cotton fields up in my country, and then all the people came to me and said, "Hey, you Black Power, you, eh?" And I said, "Well, we working for 60 cents an hour in those cotton fields for 10 hours a day. Can Black Power get us more money?" So we go back to this whole question of, this whole thing about slavery and exploitation and profiting, from poor people's needs. So I said to the people, yeah, let's do something about this. Well, the only way we're going to succeed is we have to do it white fellas way. We can't do this one black way. And I said, so what we do is white fellas form a union, and they go on strike. So we didn't form a union. I just said to them, we'll all meet at the pub next week and let's have a talk about this. I got kicked out of the pub. Well, that was pretty odd. That was coming out. I thought he was a friend of ours. But he said, "You're not having any political rallies in my pub." Right? I said, "Okay, I'll take it somewhere else." So I walked out the front and stood in the main street. And I blocked off all the street because all the people came outside. And I didn't ask the police for anything. I just said, and then the police came and blocked the streets off at both ends and said, "What the hell's going on?" But the result was that within 3 weeks after starting that strike and telling the people to go on strike, we ended up in the arbitration court within 2 weeks, and we won the court case. And we increased the wages from 60 cents to $5.25 an hour. It was a massive kick in the butt for trade unions, white trade unions, and it was also a big damage done to the Australian cotton industry because it cost them $137 million extra a year in payouts on workers. Now, the significance of that was that it created in the minds of the people the power of unity and the power to do something from within their communities. Yeah? None of these people who had supported me, they just asked me a question. And then all of a sudden they realised that, okay, assertive action of this kind, with people power and everybody doing the same thing, getting on the same page, you can win. There's nothing stopping us. Now, we won that in 3 weeks. That didn't take us long to do it at all. So, through that assertive action. Having done that, Gough Whitlam was in power at this time. He was the Prime Minister. He sent a car up and a group of people and a plane up to pick me up. I thought I was put under arrest for something, but anyway, they flew me back to Canberra. When they flew me back to Canberra, the strange thing was that I went into the Prime Minister's office, and there was the Foreign Minister, John Willesee, and then there was the Attorney General, Attorney Lionel Murphy, who became a High Court judge later. And they looking at me, and I walked in, and here I am, just 21. And he said, "While I'm Prime Minister, you are not going to walk the streets of Australia." And I thought, oh shit, because your heart drops when the Prime Minister says that, And he said, "Well, if you're going to learn, if you want to get involved in this stuff, then I'm going to do something." He said, "You're on my staff." He said, "Now go away and learn about religion, if you don't know about it. You've got 3 weeks to learn as much as you can about religion." And he said, "And then when you come back," he said, "we will have finalised arrangements for you to work in the American State Department." And so they sent me off to the American State Department under Richard Nixon's administration. And when I came, I didn't understand the whole thing about religion, not at that point anyway. And he came back and he said, "Do you know much?" And I said, "A little bit." That's all I can say. Well, I didn't really know a lot. But the 3 weeks of learning about religion sort of gives you a basic understanding of it all anyway. And in particular, the thing that I focused on was the separation by King, what's his name, that fellow with all them women, Henry VIII, and the separation of of the Church of England and the Catholics, you know. And that was all about marriage, for God's sake, you know. So anyway.
Divorce, didn't
Huh?
Divorce, rather.
Yeah, divorce, yeah. Well, marriage, yeah. Really. Well, divorce follows marriage, yeah. It's just a consequence of it. But anyway, that the significance of that came to me later. But anyway, and anyway, sending me to the US, then all of a sudden I'm having meetings with people like Congressman Shirley Chisholm, who was the first black woman of the Congress. Congressman Dallum was the first black man out of California to be elected to the Congress. And at this time there were a whole number of black senators and other black congressmen. And the most significant of those, having met with Shirley Chisholm and Congressman Rondell, was meeting then with Martin Luther King's number one offsider, was a bloke called Andrew Young, who became Congressman Andrew Young. And he and I sort of had long talks in his office in Washington. And the good thing about all of this was that, you know, I began to realise at this stage that we were beginning to put together, you know, a connection of the African diaspora. And I didn't really understand the significance of that, but over the years I've now realised a whole lot more. And that was further advanced by discussions that we had in 1973, again with the Prime Minister. He was no longer Prime Minister at this time, in 1983, a bloke called Gough Whitlam. He accompanied myself and another Aboriginal elder from Australia. We flew across and did a five-nation tour of Africa when we were negotiating and looking at the concept of the negotiating a treaty within Australia in 1979 to 1985. I was the director of that research for the formation and development of a treaty. But you see, I needed to get my people used to understanding international actions in terms of treaties, the consequences of treaties, what do they mean, understanding international diplomacy. So I started a process to get them. And this time we decided to go to Africa, and I said, we need to get into Africa simply because we need those countries that have been colonised to understand what we're doing. Because if we're going to ask for support in the international arena at some stage or another, we need to have them familiarised with what we're doing back home here. And we need to bring that level of awareness to their attention so that they understand where we're coming from. And I said, we need media attention, so we need a media personality or someone who's going to attract the media attention. Yeah? And so, having worked on Gough Whitlam's staff, and now he's resigned and he's a bit bitter about the old Queen over, you know, and her actions, I said to these guys, why don't we ask Gough Whitlam to come with us? And they said, you are joking, aren't you? A former Prime Minister come with us back for us? You joking. So I said, no, let me ring him up. So I phoned him up and talked to him. When I phoned him up, I said, what are you doing in the next 3 weeks? Yeah? And he says, why? I said, we want to go to Africa. We've had talks with a gentleman by the name of Bronson Levy from Nigeria. I'd already had preliminary discussions with him in the Nigerian embassy in Canberra. And Bronson thought this was an absolutely fabulous idea. But we were only targeting Nigeria at this time. So I rang Gough Whitlam and I said, what do you reckon? And he said, I'll ring you back. And I said, oh, yeah. That's what they all say, you know. So anyway, Gough Whitlam did. He rang me back within 10 minutes. And he said, I put all my meetings and engagements now on hold. When are we leaving? I couldn't believe it, you know. I put the phone in, he's going to come, you know, sort of thing. And they thought I was nuts. But anyway, he came, and we jumped on that plane. And the fellow, Bronson Levy, did more than just invite us to Africa. He arranged for us to meet in Kenya, he arranged for us to meet in Zimbabwe, he arranged for us to meet in Tanzania, as well as Nigeria. You know. And they reconvened the parliament in Nigeria for our visit. And they got us to address the parliament. This is a group of Aborigines, 2 days, and a former Prime Minister of Australia. They reconvened the parliament for the meeting. And then we had a special session then with the International Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we had a briefing with them just about the treaty, the concept, and our relationship with Britain, and looking for ways of settling our dispute with England. A very interesting thing occurred when we got into, on our way. We did get to meet with Indira Gandhi. I don't know how this happened, but she was in the VIP lounge in the International Airport of Delhi, with all these things you put around your neck, you know, them pretty flowers they put around your neck and smelly stuff. And we had a luncheon there. We had about an hour, stop over. And we had this dinner. And she just wanted to know what the hell was going on. That's all she wanted to know, was just tell me what's happening. Because I heard you were coming through my country, and I want to know what's going on. So she was forewarned about that. And it was her brother, and I'm sure we liked her, so we actually meet this one, this lady by accident. You know, it was just by circumstance. And we did that. Now, the idea was to inform them of what we were doing and what our ambitions were, so that they could raise the issue in Chogam, in the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and we would put the proposal up to them for them to raise this as an issue, as a topic, as an agenda item, formal agenda item within Chogam. And that was the whole idea of briefing them. Everybody, all the media back home was saying, because it coincided with the coming event of the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, so it coincided with that. And then all the media was saying that we were going over there to ask these African states to boycott the games. Now that's silly, I know what blackfellas, they love games. Yeah? So we were going to be pushing it up in to try and ask black people, say, you can't come up here and run in our country, you know. There's no way in the world that was going to happen. You know. So that was not the issue. The agenda was to brief those countries. Now, when we got to Zimbabwe, there was a very interesting conversation that took place with Robert Mugabe. Robert Mugabe said to Gough Whitlam, and this is something that will stick in my head for the rest of my life, because it shocked me into realising that even the people we call friends are not necessarily real friends. He asked Gough Whitlam, he said, well, how many Aborigines do you have in Australia? And Whitlam said, we've got about 400,000, 600,000 maybe max. And he said, well, you know, you're the richest country in the world. Why don't you just say that as of this date, we will pay every man, woman and child who is Aboriginal, we will put into a trust fund $1 million for you to spend as you want. That's our compensation to you. You know, Mugabe said, what's the difficulty with that? I'm sure you can do that over a 10-year period. And then Whitlam actually said, yeah, we thought about that. And that's when I nearly collapsed. And he said something that is now, plays out and is very, very real now. He said, if we did that, he said, this is our thinking, this is their thinking inside that Labour Party, the Labour government. If we did that, there's two possible things could happen. One, you would get all the con men and tricksters who will come out and bleed these people and steal their money and all these marvellous ideas and massive, grandiose challenges and saying this is how it can be done and what we can do. But then he said, but then there's another side of their story. He said, and that is, he said, you know, there's not many white people living beyond the Blue Mountains in the centre of Australia, where all the Aborigines live. And he said, these people using their money and using their smartness would buy up all those businesses and relocate all the white people to the coast and keep them there, because they would own the whole economy of inland Australia. And that creates big problems, because then you've got white Australia living on the coastal strips around Australia. Yeah. And of course Arnhem Land and northern Queensland gives us all access to the ocean. South Australia, where the Aborigines have access to the ocean, that gives us all access to the ocean. Northern Kimberley's area, from Geraldton north right up into that whole northern part of Australia, is open to us because our people own the land and they live on those coastal strips, so we get access to the rest of the world. And Australia, white Australia, would be restricted to those tourist parts that they call the Gold Coast, you know, the Whitsunday Islands, maybe down around Melbourne and those areas there, but right down the east coast. And so he pointed out that the Labor government was, and all other governments from his point, because we had private talk in the motel later, he said, we fear that. And so their concern was that 2% of the population would get ownership of 100% of the country. Just like that. And that's their enormous fear. Now we have compensation and we're getting, you know, some royalties from government money. If you look at the Australian laws that exist in Australia right now, Aboriginal people are not allowed to own the money from the royalties. The royalties are controlled by government legislation, by government-appointed bureaucrats. We are not allowed to touch that money. We are not allowed to touch what they call the Aboriginal estate, right? Because it's controlled by legislation within the Parliament of Australia. We cannot get our hands on that money. And there's a lot of money there, a lot of money. You know? And they've been collecting royalties since 1942, we found out, from mining uranium, from when they first started having a Canadian company in, what do they call that place, up in Arnhem Land there, Roper River and, what was that place? No, it was Roper River and those places where the first toxic spill was when they killed everything in that Arnhem Land region. And that was in the 1940s. So since 1942, they've been collecting royalties for Aboriginal people. So there's a big wad of money in that country that's owned by Aboriginal people. We can't get our hands on it. We cannot get our hands on it. Rum jungle, that's it. And we can't get our hands on it. If we got our hands on it, we would have more money than we could ever imagine. And we could build our nation states the way we want to, how we want to. We would build education programs, school programs, health programs out of all that money. Now, here's the irony. When they brought in the Northern Territory intervention in 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, or almost 20 years ago actually, all the money that they've used for those housing programs under the Northern Territory intervention, they do not use taxpayers' money. They're drawing down off that money to do these things, and the Aboriginal people have got no control over it at all. It's all they're using our money, and they got every Aboriginal person imprisoned into believing that that's taxpayers' money. It's not. It's from royalties. You know, they've even got it, I think now, and I stand corrected, but I'll make this statement. I think they've even taken it out of interest-bearing deposits because there's so much money there. Yeah. And I dare say that the government are in fact using that money now to fix up white programs, because that's a wad of money. So we're in a situation where we're now starting to assert self-determination. We're starting to take our own actions, and since 1972 I've been pursuing a little silent sort of thing, and I had to go back and study law and get to understand the white man system and how it works, and the worst thing you can do, now I can understand why they didn't want to have black people educated, you know, because they were frightened of how we might start thinking like them, and be able to then one day turn it against them. But what we found now is quite revealing, and some of the things Esther's touched on that wrongful acts, because I think it come out of that convention on wrongful acts. I think that's a 2002 convention that's now developed in terms of reparations and compensation and so on. And of course, when you look at that wrongful acts, it now fits into something that since coming to England the last time when we had talks, first talks, something that's come up, because you see, it advances the Mabo factor for us. And we found in English common law, thanks to a Jewish rabbi, who said, have a look at a thing called deceit by fraud in English law. And when we have a look at this, it relates to a king or a queen exercising authority by a wrongful act and not being told the truth. Now our argument is that, okay, when the Admiralty sent out a little bloke called James Cook to circumnavigate the world and do his scientific studies, and if you find land that looks good, there's a secret order. He had a secret commission, and that was you are to take the land with the consent of the inhabitants. That's in the secret order. Now he claimed Australia, the east coast of Australia, to the 135th parallel for and on King George III. They came back to Australia, and of course, as a consequence of that action, by him planting a flag on a little island that's not even attached to Australia, in the waters of Torres Strait Island, so he didn't plant the flag on the mainland of Australia in the first place. Anyway, the king, so they began to exercise power and authority over Australia by a wrongful act. This English dicta of deceit by fraud is still part of the English common law system. And the worst part for England now is that law also says that no matter how you look at it, the courts cannot interpret the wrongful act in any such way so as to give power to the prerogative of the king to do what he did. So by him exercising his authority through orders in council, through letters patent and various other things, the court prevents the kings and queens of England from saying, well, we made a mistake, but it's got to be fixed up. So unfortunately they now have law, there's a law in this country that says that can't happen. So not even the king's or queen's prerogative powers can be used to circumvent the law. And so that we've now found that. And when I read that, I thought, hallelujah, because they cannot be forgiven for that. And now, combined with this wrongful acts convention, we now couple those two together because they're in international law. And we couple that wrongful act with this law of England on deceit by fraud. Then we couple that then with Blackstone's commentaries on English law as it was in 1770 and 1788. And you see, Blackstone law concluded that you couldn't take the land. So you could take the land in three forms. There's only three recognisable ways in which they could acquire land. One is that it was terra nullius, that is, uninhabited, totally. Two, by conquest. Or three, by cession. Now, my people never ever ceded our land. We never ceded at all. We never talked. No white fellows come to talk to us about the possibilities, because in 1837 there was a court case in Australia, and it was a court called Murrow, Jack Congo Murrow. He was charged with murdering a fellow Aboriginal of his own tribe. Under his law, he could do it because the fellow committed offence against his law, and so he had the power to go and kill him. Because we have capital punishment in our law and corporal punishment. You do wrong, we kill you. Because we didn't have policemen, we didn't have jails, not like these other uncivilised people. Yeah. And they called us barbarous and, with all these road type laws. Now, at that time, they were stretching people over rats, but they called us barbarians, and barbarous peoples. And in that court case, this was in 1836, 1837, he said that old man stood up in the court in his language, and it was translated by another fellow who learned his language, a white man, religious man called Threlkeld. And this fellow translated what the old man said to the court, and the old man said to the court, and it's by some journalists who sat in, because only journalists took notes in courts in those days. They recorded him as saying that your law does not apply to me. I am not a subject of the king. I come under my own law, and so this court has no jurisdiction over me. So he argued that case, a question of jurisdiction. When the court, the reason it took 12 months is that they had no idea what to do with it. These judges, this was the Supreme Court of the colony of New South Wales. They had no idea how to deal with this. And so what they concluded was later overturned in a number of cases. But they concluded, this is where the judges in Australia first concluded that the King's Law applied simply because your people were so barbarous and so uncivilized, and what's the term they used, Ellie? You good grasp on that, when they said that we were mentally, basically saying that we were mentally incapable, and our society was not in a position where we could be classified as a sovereign people because of our, the level of our civility, and so they said that we were not in a position to be able to classify as a sovereign people. Now, then in 1975, after the Western Sahara Advisory Opinion in the International Court of Justice on this whole thing, there was a High Court case in Australia called the Seas and Submerged Lands Act court case. It was Commonwealth versus New South Wales, but it was over deep, over the territorial waters in the sea, on the coast. And in there, the judges looked at the question of British sovereignty and New South Wales sovereignty, and they had to go through and dissect this whole question of sovereignty. And this foolish judge has the audacity in that case to say that the King's power, British power over Australia, is simply enforced by the fact that there was no need for any conveyancing. That is, the transferring of any land from another group of people who had a proprietary interest in the land. Right? And so they use that argument as saying, well, sovereignty of the Aboriginal people just don't exist. The Aboriginal people don't exist. And so we just took over. And so this High Court case is the one that they now use to say that we have jurisdiction over you. This court case. But you see, the white lawyers in Australia are not saying, hang on a minute, that was 1975. If you read Mabo judgment on this question, Mabo says that all other precedents are no longer available. And so that 1875 case is gone. But what it does is it resurrects the claim by that old man in 1836 to that court and said, you don't have jurisdiction over it. You see, and they came back because what the lawyer in that 1836 case said was that if this man is a British subject and this court's going to recognise him as a British subject, then this man, these people, can bring a lawsuit against the British and ask for compensation for the land that's been taken from him. And that's when they went in this great inquiry as to how they were going to deal with this, because we had to make these people so uncivilised that we cannot recognise that they had any proprietary interest in the land. And then Mabo overturned all that, and then it reinstated that old man's arguments. And that old man's arguments stand now as a question in law that has to be finally dealt with. And so it's from that old man that we now are bringing our case up, because there's something here now that these fellas cannot get away with anymore. Now, people are saying to me, and I've had people say this to me, but that was then. And I'm saying, yeah, but I'm talking about now. Yeah? And a wrong has to be fixed up. There was a wrong back then, and it's going to be fixed up now. And so you no longer have the grounds that you argue to stand, because your modern day courts are dealing with this. And as Mabo said, we are not here to rewrite history. We're here to deal with the matter of justice. And that's what that court says. And so, no matter how you look at that case, the fact is the case went so close that they couldn't, for very obvious reasons, so close to recognise our continuing sovereignty. They couldn't, because then if they would have recognised that, they themselves as judges would have had to stand down from the bench, walk out the door, because they had no authority. Okay? So the position that we have now in Australia is we can no longer go to the thief and ask him to recognise that he stole something from us. He's not going to do that. Yeah? So He's gone to look after the interest of 22 million white Australians and foreigners. And he's going to look after their interest as opposed to ours. Yeah. So this is the conundrum we have reached now in Australia. Yeah. Aboriginal sovereignty is face to face with these people, and there's nothing they can do about it. And how they try and get away from this, it's their problem, not ours. Yeah. And so my application to the ICJ, which is why I'm here, is going to be fraught with a dilemma that will be created in Australia, whereby, what do you do with the white people who are there? What do you do with their rights? Because you see, when the white people realise that, hang on a minute, what about our rights? We bought all this land, we paid for it. We bought it off these thieves. Yeah? So, in terms of the societal norms, and and this, now I understand a little bit more about why the Europeans were a bit hesitant in terms of negotiating the rights of Indigenous people, because they were always on about territorial integrity. And I now understand why there's this, this hesitation on their part, because we win a case over there, and we have our rights recognised and that they are continuing. Well, then there goes the whole foundation upon which a country has been developed. It goes down the gurgler, and they have to rewrite it all again. But only this time, they have to rewrite it with us at the table. And so we're the only ones who can give that sort of solidarity to the Australian society and to the Australian polity, and justify their legal system. So Australia's got a very big matter to deal with. And so I find that very interesting. But one thing that, and I'll end on this, one thing that I know about what's going on back home right now is the government really has to work very hard at suppressing us, repressing us. They have to do their damnedest to keep us down. Because you see, they can't afford to allow us to rise to this level of, and this position within the equality of polity within the country, and have that legal standing. And they're working feverishly now to talk with as many Aboriginal people as possible, and do as much as they possibly can to falsely represent to the rest of the world that they're doing all these things like reporting to the world that, we have a reconciliation program going on. We have a program of purchasing land back for Aboriginal people under the Indigenous Land Corporation to address the dispossession. I'll tell you, there's another little story to that one, but anyway. And then they this other thing they call reconciliation, not reconciliation, the need for constitutional recognition. So they're really pushing this here, and this attempt to show inclusiveness within the Australian society. But you see, all of that there is enormous caveats over all those actions, enormous caveats. And of course, the thing that I don't like about it, is that they're using these continually these Judeo-Christian ethics from which to work, and they're always saying, God and government, and it's annoying. God will not save them, and so I remember that same man I talked about earlier, C.U. Rowley, said that what do these white British settlers expect, that Aborigines are going to sort of become Christians and then ask for their lot in heaven, because that's about all they're going to get. And that was his thinking. But that always hits in the back of my mind, that I will have my just deserts on earth before I go to heaven, wherever that is. And so I come back to your comment about neocolonialism, neocolonial enslavement. In Australia, there's a very, very clever way that they're doing this neocolonial enslavement. It's through a program of welfare. You see, 80% of our population are welfare dependent. 80%. We have no ability to develop an economy. We have no income of our own. White people in Australia won't employ Aborigines. Governments pay them to employ us. Yeah? They set up these training programs, and white people will only employ us if they get subsidies. When the subsidies run out, there's no longer a position for the Aborigine. That's the way they do it. And so they're falsifying all their records under these programs by saying, you know, we had this many Aborigines this part of the year, now look at them all. You know, the numbers dropped. That's only because they're paying people to employ us, to get us off those statistics and get that and to distort the statistics. So there's some really nasty stuff going on. And on the Commission of Inquiry that you spoke about, there is something that's very important. When you look at that commission that you're talking about in terms of setting up terms of reference for a commission of that type, you might want to have a look at the Commission of Inquiry of 1836, 1837, British inquiry, parliamentary inquiry, into the killing of the Aborigines in the British dominions. Because, you see, here they acknowledge the mass slaughter and killing of Aboriginal people in their colonies. And so that 1836-37 inquiry, I think, is relevant to all of our discussions at this day, because the British recognised it. The British conducted an inquiry into it, but the British did nothing about it. Yeah. And so I leave you with this. There's a group of people down home who have now established what they call the South Sea Islander. Anyway, I forget their name, but they have a name. These are all the Aboriginal people who came from, who were slaves, brought out to do the sugar cane in Queensland and northern New South Wales. They were from, places like, they were the Kanaks, they were the main ones that they went after in the French Caribbean, in the French area of New Caledonia. And of course there were some Fijians, and of course there were people from Nauru, there were people from all those islands within that geographical location. And now we know that they've been they traded with them under the French flag, not British flag. They were British flying the French flag. And that's how they got away from being prosecuted by their own, because of the anti-slavery movement that was happening in England at the time. So that's very interesting to see that. And of course, we've now found a lot of other stuff in relation to Aboriginal people, which we will be pursuing. But I hope by the time I leave the mainland of Europe and England, I will go home and be able to put into the courts back home. Incidentally, I have two Supreme Court cases on hold back home, because on the question of jurisdiction, and I've got them on hold until I return, because I'm saying you don't have jurisdiction. When I get home, I will go home and I will show that these people cannot do anything forever and a day after I arrive back home. Because I think we found the doorway, and I want to expose the doorway on how that's happened. But we will talk about this doorway very soon, once I get in that door. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Okay, any questions, folks?
That's a really difficult